Welcome, everyone. Would like to welcome you all to the 20th, if I'm not wrong, webinar in the War and New War and Peace series, the way we termed it after the Second Karabakh War, organized by the Caucasus Edition journal's editorial team. I'm Philip Gamagelian, one of the editors of Caucasus Edition, and I'll be co-moderating today the webinar together with my colleague and the Georgian editor of Caucasus Edition, Sofia Tsvariashvili. And the topic of the webinar is the attempt, at least so far, by the Georgian parliament to pass legislation on registration of foreign agents. The speakers today are Saba Brachveli from Open Society Foundation of Georgia, Nijat Mamedbaili, independent lawyer networks from Azerbaijan, and Dmitry Dubrovsky, research fellow at Krakow Institute in Prague. And gentlemen, as we go to you and you speak, I would appreciate maybe a few more words about your background, because your background was very important for us in inviting you. And thank you for making the time to be here. A few words about the context in which we are working. Earlier this year, a relatively minor party that is known to be affiliated somewhat with the Georgian Dream ruling party introduced the law, which initially didn't get much attention. And then a few weeks later, somewhat unexpectedly perhaps, the Georgian Dream, the ruling party, threw its support behind the law, and then even perhaps more surprisingly, tried to very quickly pass it through parliament. So it was adopted, the first draft was very quickly adopted. And perhaps even more surprisingly was the mobilization that in the streets against the law that went from 0 to 100, I don't know, in a matter of a day or two. It seemed to be very muted reaction. And then once the law was clearly received the Georgian Dream's support and was it was obvious that this was going to pass, it immediately mobilized a very large number of people coming to the streets, leading to clashes, and we all probably followed. And the law was, well, not officially withdrawn. I think there has been no formal process of withdrawal, but promise was made that essentially it will not move forward. So these are, in a way, the developments of the day. And we intend to discuss the law itself, its chances to passing, the repercussions. We also have speakers from Russia and Azerbaijan, whose countries passed, who have a first-hand experience somewhat with some similar restrictive laws in their respective countries. And the format of the webinar is that we will have a discussion for about 30-40 minutes, moderated by Sofo and I. And after that, we will turn to questions and answers that audience is welcome to ask. And if you'd like to ask a question, please post it in the Q&A button, clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And if you like to post a comment rather a question, you can use the chat window to chat, and that should be visible to everybody. So that's more or less the format, and total we intend to stay together for about 80 minutes. So we should end by about 8:20 Tbilisi time. Without further ado, let me actually ask the first question to Sopo and Saba, since both of you were in the protests, if I'm not wrong, and both of you are in Tbilisi, I know. And how would you explain the, I'd say, rapid mobilization in a way without any kind of clear opposition party leading the way? So essentially, what were the developments that led to such a quick mobilization? Do you see any kind of a longer, bigger picture political developments out of what happened? And how overall you would describe the situation now?
Thank you, Phil, very much for hosting the webinar introduction, and good evening, everyone. Yes, I think there are like two major factors which really caused the massive protest, and because this law, initiation of this law, and then voting for it on the first reading actually was seen as the because Georgia has this candidacy status process and this 12 recommendations from EU, which it should fulfill. And it was somehow seen as this sabotaging this process of the integration into European Union. And second, it was seen as the try of the like a leading party, Georgian Dream, to consolidate the power, because in 2024 we have parliamentary elections, and this law, as we have seen in the different countries experienced in Russia, in Hungary, and so on, does limits the democracy and consolidating power used as a tool for it. So I think a big role was played by because this protest was really grassroots, but also like a lot of different spheres, professors, students, sports, like everyone was involved. Even the president of Georgia was opposing the law, saying that she's going to veto it. So, and also I think this clashes on the first day and using of the tear gas and so on really brought more people on the streets and to see like but I wanted to like one more thing what we see here because protesters insisted, and actually on the second day the second hearing was planned actually like majority of the one person voted yes, and actually this law now is withdrawn, but yeah, we still see this process of like it came back, or also we see the today's there is this press conference of the chairman of the Georgian Dream, where we can see that the leading party is still leaning towards this conservative populist direction, and highlighting this role of the like educational institutions, recruiting the students for political activism. Even he used the words as like liberal fascism and so on. And we see that now there can be different ways of different laws, or like limiting the educational institutions and so on. So yeah, we are like looking to this process. Thank you for the question. And maybe Saba, you can update us.
Point, maybe I think you should sit a bit back. It's very a bit the voice is interrupting quite a bit. It seems actually you are too close to the mic. Sorry.
Okay, now
it's better.
okay.
Yeah, hello everyone, and thanks for having us once again. So yeah, Sofia made an excellent point here, pointing out the inclusiveness of the protests, which means that all of the social groups were represented, and basically there was not a single group that did not oppose to this draft bill. And this was one of the key, this was one of the aims and goals that the civil society had when we started to oppose this draft bill. And the second really important distinction that these protests had from the previous ones, I think, is the horizontality of the protests, which means that there was not a single leader of this protest. There was not a single group leading all the others. So even though the Georgian Dream has tried again and again to have like multiple smear campaigns, and they tried it this time too. For example, they put out some posters in the streets calling us, some of us at least, the traitors of the church and the traitors of the country. Even though they tried to do that, the faces that were on these posters were not outside leading the people. So basically, this was many different groups having single message, which was no to the Russian law, and the Georgian Dream could not just identify a single leader and just blackmail them. So this was also a very important distinction, I think. And also, I would like to point out that the MPs who initiated this bill are not actually a political party. They're just a proxy for the Georgian Dream. They're not registered as a political party. They're not registered as a sort of a movement or anything. They do not actually exist. They don't even have a website. So we knew from the beginning, from the very beginning, that it was a law actually initiated by the Georgian Dream, and we had the sole focus on them. And it was also very important that they could not stand against this focus, and they had to just go back and retreat. I personally do not think that this bill will come up again. But I think this bill, for all intents and purposes, is dead. But I think that the Georgian Dream will try in the coming months to initiate some sort of a different bill with the same outcome for the civil society. For example, we think that this sort of a bill might be one on defamation or LGBTQ people rights, which will be more, which will be harder to oppose as a whole country. And they will use division tactics to sow division amongst us. And this is something that we have to work on as we go on in our society. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Saba. So now I would want to ask our speakers, our guests, maybe first Dimitri and Nijat, because we have been part of this process all these recent weeks, but maybe you have these views like from outside, like how you see it, because still like Georgian Dream is playing, like saying that it's like for the transparency, for democracy, we are still going to join EU, but with pride and so on. And on the other hand, you see protests, but how it was seen from outside, from your perspective. Dimitri, maybe you go first.
Okay, so, well, first of all, I just realized that I have a kind of three dimension of my relations with the topic of foreign agent. First, I still affiliated with the Center for Independent Social Research, the sociological institution, which is the official NGO, which was declared in Russia foreign agent and back when in 2015. And then for the second dimension, I was involved in and still involved in the project of the research on the different expertise and how the different Russian academics are contributing into the identification of these foreign agents. And this is the second, connection with this topic. And finally, since the last April, I am personally a foreign agent at the very end, to be fully, integrated into the research topic on foreign agent. Being the foreign agent, it's also a very interesting experience as a kind of self-ethnography observation. But from the outside, let me start with the 2 points maybe important for our conversation. First is the 3 days ago, the Bosnian Serbs Republic also declared the need to elaborate the same law. And also the same days, the European Union allegedly also interested to develop the same law. And let me be the kind of the evil advocate here. So I'm a little bit afraid. So this is not only the sign of the authoritarian regime who just want to cut off the independent voices. This is the interesting example from my perspective, how the authoritarian regime is mimicking the general scheme to restrict the infiltration of the toxic money from the authoritarian regimes to the democratical countries, to the democracy. And that is why I'm thinking what would be great to understand what would be the difference. Because like a FARA, like this possible law in European Union had a more or less legitimate goal to unveil, to demonstrate the toxic relationship between the different organizations and the, let's say, Russian propaganda, clearly. But at the same time, the Russia always declared that is the same task for the Russian law, just to unveil the improper relations between the political organizations which pursue the political goals and the foreign donors. And I would say that the evil is sitting in the details here. The basic difference is, ironically, is not the character of the country. The basic difference in the project is the causal relationship between the money and our activity, and the money and the outcome. While the FARA is definitely persecuted people if you're not registered, being clearly the agent of the foreign principal, providing the kind of lobbying the certain interest and having money based on the agreement. And that is something which should be proved in the law, in the litigation. While the Russia has this law mostly independently. So that is the prosecutor office should prove that any political activity, but every public activity considered as a political, and any foreign money, including currently the one of the case I know is just literally 30 sums from Tajikistan was considered as foreign support and declared the person the foreign agent. And this is why I believe that ironically here, my understanding of this story is not who exactly, what kind of regime is declared it needs to adopt this law, but rather is the construction, the constitution of law itself.
Thank you, Dimitri. Now I would want to ask Nijat to share his understanding and view on this process.
Thank you, Sophia. I also welcome all our listeners. Of course, for me, as I'm coming from the same region, that the news about the recent NGO legislation in Georgia also negatively affected all of us, because in our region we have observed the same initiative put by Azerbaijani government years ago. Actually, Azerbaijan was the first country in the post-Soviet area that copied Russian NGO law, let's say foreign agent law, and those amendments were brought into the national legislation between 2013 and 2015. As Dimitri mentioned before, all these restrictions were actually focused that the state could have a chance to control the money flow into the country, and also to control all the operations of internal NGOs, and as well as foreigner NGOs that is operating in the country. But what consequences had in Azerbaijan the Russian copied NGO law, that it led to arrests, it led to restrictions. More than 50 international organizations left Azerbaijan. The bank accounts were frozen, as well as more than 20 NGOs in Azerbaijan were fined with the high amount of money, as well as several NGO prominent leaders in Azerbaijan were put behind the bars. So no any positive outcomes have been observed in Azerbaijani society since the parliament passed the amendments into law on grants and law on non-governmental organizations in Azerbaijan.
Thank you. As I know, also Saba, you have worked and you have had expertise of actually working on different this kind of laws, this kind of style of laws in different countries. So maybe you can share your opinion about like what was similar, different, how it was implemented, more to go to how it can implicate in our context.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And Dmitry actually pointed out quite well this similarities and differences between these. Well, we can call them two models of FARA laws. One of them being the democratic model, which is in the United States, currently being adopted in the UK, and so on, and the other model, which we can call the Russian model, which is currently in place in Russia and was later adopted and then annulled in Hungary. The really important distinction is who is the subject of these laws. First of all, the subject of these laws in the United States is the lobbyist companies. So the organizations who have no real organizational freedom, so to say, that directly serve the interests of their partners, right? Whereas in Russia, in Russia and Hungary, and also in this proposed draft bill, the subjects would be the NGOs and the media. So those who actually have the organizational freedom, and well, the media is not told what to report on, and the NGOs are not told how to write their reports and what to write in them, right? So it's different. And if any sort of a country, for example, Canada, who is now thinking of adopting a FARA bill, adopts a FARA bill which concerns just the lobbyist companies, those that are directly financed by some foreign country. And also there's one big difference. These countries who adopt these laws have sort of friendly countries list and the hostile countries list, right? And one of the biggest concerns for Georgian people was that this bill would not differentiate between, for example, the Russian system, who openly who is occupying 20% of our country, and the EU, who is actually funding our development projects and is our partner. So yeah, that would be a huge distinction. So the biggest distinction between these two sets of laws is that one regards just the lobbyist companies, and the other is actually the other intends to curtail the functioning of the NGOs and the media. And this is why in the second sets of laws, only the financing part is used to circle the subjects of this law. So, for example, in Russia, in the beginning, it was about $6,700. So if an organization received more than that sum of money, then it would be the subject of this law. In Georgia, it would have been more than 20% of its annual income. And in Hungary, it was about 20,000 euros and so on. So as these undemocratic countries try to curtail the NGOs, they cannot point out the organizational freedom. So they go on a different way, and they point out the the financing part. So that's another distinction. And one other really huge issue that this sort of bill usually entails is the personal data protection issue. For example, in Georgia, the subjects of this law, the organizations would have to provide all sorts of personal data that was regarding not only the please excuse me, not only the organization, but its staff members and its beneficiaries. And the government would be able to not only collect these personal data, but also publish as it so fits. So that would basically result in not just a stigmatic result, for example, us being called agents and so on, but actually a dramatic result, which because no real beneficiary would come to us and work with us, because their personal data is often very sensitive, right? and therefore no donors would finance our activities because we wouldn't have any beneficiaries, and that personal data provision would basically result in the civic society organizations stopping their activity. So yeah, these are the three huge aspects of the FARA laws in democratic and non-democratic societies.
If I can ask a follow-up question, so thank you for outlining the distinctions between these laws. But I think two things I'm hearing. Yeah, one is that the law itself is nothing extraordinary and specific to, say, Russia, right? As in the way it's been branded recently in Georgia, perhaps tactically was Russian law, so it makes it sound scarier, but essentially similar, in principle, similar content laws have been passed all around the world and are increasingly passing. And part of it is to, as I understand, increase the transparency of the funding sources and potential kind of dark money influences. So am I understanding right that in principle, you all are not opposed to some form of a transparency law, but essentially the way it's passed, the way it's phrased then becomes important? And what I heard is first is the content of it, right? So who is the subject and the target of the law? Is it essentially established organizations, or is it directly from affiliated with foreign governments? But also, is the title of the law is also matters. I mean, I live in the US. I run an NGO here. There is a law like that. The foreign agent concept does not have the same connotation at all here that it has in post-Soviet space. But also, as an NGO, we are not subject to this law, right? So we are, as an independent American NGO, we get money from European Union and Sweden and so on. But we declare this, of course, on our page. But that doesn't qualify us as foreign agents, since even though majority of the money might not be from American sources, right? So what would be essentially the version of it that could be reasonable and supported by civil society?
On the second question, you're absolutely right. The term agent, which is in the name of this bill, has drastically different connotations in the US and in the post-Soviet countries, because here an agent is basically a synonym of a traitor. So yeah, the proponents of the bill try to actually argue that point, that here the same name is in the US bill, but the meaning behind it is quite different. And on the first question, the purpose and the aim of the bill is probably what differentiates what is the biggest difference between these two sets of laws, because in the United States, it's just the lobbyist companies who are under this bill, and therefore the overall democracy of the country is not really affected by this law. Also these lobbyists are, for example, not required to disclose that they're an agent of a foreign power in the communication to the public. They only have to disclose it when they approach a state official. So that's also a huge distinction. Whereas in the authoritarian regimes, these laws are specifically for the media and NGO organizations, which are, well, the forefront of the democracy. So yeah, the subjects basically, subject of the law basically decides the purpose of it. So to sum up, the okay version of this law would be the one where it did not affect the functioning of the NGOs and media organizations, and it was only curtailed. It would only refer to the actions of the lobbyist companies. So that would probably be acceptable. And this is also something that I think the European Court of the Human Rights has pointed out in its judgment last year against Russia. So yeah, I completely agree with them.
And to make sure, yeah, that Nijat and Dima also, can contribute. As in, is there a version of the law that is acceptable? And how does it look like?
Yeah, I think there is a version of the law that is acceptable.
I'm sorry, I was asking Dima.
Oh yeah, sorry, excuse me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, yeah.
Well, again, so that's is the ironically, if you would consider it seriously, if they would be serious in Russia when they introduced the law, it would be absolutely legitimate. It would have legitimate aid, because that is if the organization clearly involved in politics and in policy. And here is just a key trick which has been used in Russian law, because in Russian language, the politics and policy is the real one word, politica. And that means that if you're involved in the policy, meaning the broad discussion of all the social and political issues, you would be considered as involved in politics, which is the absolutely different story. You probably understand this is the just election and the running for the office. And that is why I believe if there would be the law would concentrate on the narrow definition of the politics, and there is the definitions of the political parties or other public organization directly involved in the politics, that will be strongly enough to protect any independent democratic country from the toxic money from abroad.
Thank you, Dimitri. I wanted to ask Nijat, as I know you have been involved in the Lawyers Network, actually advocating for the non-governmental organizations, maybe, and like this process and the experience in Azerbaijan, how it went. Like first the law is adopted, which looks more or less maybe harmless. That's how the Georgian government announced it, but how gradually it all, what was the experience, how it went since 2014, as I remember.
There is no major change since 2014. Actually, when it comes to, in general, the operation of the non-governmental organizations is regulated by the law on non-governmental organizations and the long runs, and with the several decisions of the Cabinet of Ministers. Before 2013, independent civil society in Azerbaijan functioned largely because of the support of the foreign donors and were able to conduct financial operations even if their grant had not been approved by the authorities. But the amendments that came since 2013, actually there were 3 amendments between October 2014 and February 2013. The paralyzing result actually led to negative consequences. I don't want to take your time more. I just want to give one specific example about the organization that we set 2 years ago in Azerbaijan, Independent Lawyers Network. It was organized by me and 2 colleagues of mine who are human rights lawyers in Azerbaijan. So we established the organization and we submitted required documents to the Minister of Justice. But in a month, we received a letter from the Minister of Justice with an absurd argument for the refusal, mentioning that the name of the institution does not indicate the characteristics or the nature of its activities. I just want to bring to your attention that such similar cases were brought before the European Court of Human Rights 2 years ago, last year. Even this year, we are preparing a new applications to submit to the European Court of Human Rights. More than in 2021, more than 25 newly established NGOs were refused for registration according to the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. Again, I mean, what we see in the scene right now, there is a nice term developed by our Russian colleague, managed civil society. What we see currently in Azerbaijan, there is a well-managed civil society by Azerbaijani government. So instead of having professional, decent and honest civil society leaders to contribute to the positive progress of the country, we see, instead of them, we see Congo leaders and actors of the managed civil society.
Thank you, Nijat. Well, yes, as we see, like there are like different characteristics of the law and how they are like in different contexts implemented. I also wanted to ask Dimitri, because I know that you have been part of the educational institution and in Russia since 2012, there were like different limitations, adding media, adding to the more personal. So how was your experience, and like has it, and how it has limited the democratic process, like educational institutions, if you have any reflection?
Yeah, but again, so it's seriously depends on the intention. Of course, the same FARA do not restrict the activity of the independent science or the media in the United States, while the intention of the people who invented this project originally, it was quite clear to close the independent voices and to demonstrate the foreign influence to all the liberal and democratic media, democratic liberal human rights NGO, and also as well even the independent academic institutions. As my personal concern was always been that it's not only the NGO punishment, the human rights NGO for the first hand, and secondly the media, but finally is the even independent think tanks like the Center for Independent Social Research I am affiliated with, or with the Levada Center or the Saratov Center, the gender studies, and there's numerous different examples I could bring. And that is why the general idea is to blame. So this is not, it's also interesting how exactly it was done in the terms of the real implementation of this law. So that's not only the organization should voluntarily be registered as a foreign agent, if they are not, they should be punished or they pay fine for not doing so. But secondly, after they being registered forcibly to this list of the Ministry of Justice, the all organizations should demonstrate this status in all the possible way, in all the public presentation and only printing, and this is it's lately converted into the same rules for the personal persons who already also could be the foreign agent in Russia, because this is another way to create the kind of enemy of the people in the new circle of the history, because that's originally was the kind of only legal entity, but recently it was they adopted the new law when they converted the certain people to be a kind of foreign agent. And I was that's my first experience. It wasn't my idea, but the publishing house which published my scientific article was pushed to publish the additional justification. This is article written by the foreign agent and blah blah blah. It was demanded by this law, and this is clearly to stigmatize. It's certainly not about the information, and certainly not about even the reason why the people or the organization was put into the list of foreign agent, but just as the public campaign of shame of those who had been put into the list of foreign agent, and this was clearly the statement beyond this legislation and the intention of those who had adopted this law and implemented it.
Thank you. I would now, checking the time, I want to ask a last question, and then I'll open the audience questions. So I would just want to remind people who are attending that they can submit the questions which we can ask to the speakers. And the last question I want to ask first to Saba, and to one more time, maybe you can share what is your vision, what is this political process is going in Georgia, and what can be your recommendations to the protesters who oppose to the government, to international actors. So maybe you can share your recommendations.
Well, as the bill is currently dead, we have been working with our international partners and our regional NGOs and the general public on different messages than we had been working on before. this process. So one of the questions that was asked also in the Q&A session is that who are these MPs and why did the Georgian Dream take over the bill, right? So the political landscape is such that this party, the ruling party, has created sort of a proxy party, which is not even a real party, but these are the radicals, and the GD wants to sort of distance from them, but also like accept their demands and play sort of a moderate party role. So this is what they're doing, and what we are trying to tell our international partners is that this new sort of a party is not a real party. This is just an extension of the Georgian Dream, and so all the new draft bills and all these sort of propositions that are aimed at curtailing the civil society organizations, the LGBTQ people, and so other vulnerable people are coming directly from the Georgian Dream. And we are trying to educate the population that does not see it that way, that there is no difference between this new sort of a party and the Georgian Dream. And we are trying to tell people that with these laws we cannot continue our path to the European Union, which is actually a goal that is put in our constitution and which 81% of our people agree with. So these are the concrete messages that we are trying to sort of relay to our people and see how they respond to it. Thank you.
If I can, so first of all, another reminder to the audience if to send questions. For now, thank you, Saba, for answering the only question we had so far from the audience. And let me then pose my own. That Georgia also has been a hub in a way for many others. So it has also an important regional dimension. For decades or years, for sure, that I'm aware, Armenians Azerbaijanis were meeting there. So there was a place for Armenians Azerbaijanis to meet. Also, any kind of joint ventures were done mostly through Georgia. Recently, after this recent escalation phase of Russian invasion into Ukraine, we have a big Russian immigrant community moving to Georgia. Right, so yes, essentially it has a very important regional dimension, and how that could be affected either by this law or overall by what seemed to be an authoritarian turn, at least an attempt towards by the Georgian government. Right, so any implications with that, any moves that are kind of coordinated outside of Georgian only civil society here to counter that? How do you see the developments, both in negative sense and also what's being done in that respect? And that's probably, let's start with Saba, but then ask also Nijat and Dmitry and Sopo.
Regarding the Russian and Russia's aggression and war in Ukraine, we are like the Georgian people is united in the support of Ukraine, and even though we've had lots of Russian refugees coming in, this situation hasn't changed. So overall, our direction to the west is like not changed, and I think that our government, who saw currently that the Georgian people understand what it means to continue our path to the European Union, will not will think twice, so to say, before they submit this sort of a bill again.
Dmitry, Nijat, how do you see this playing out in a broader regional level?
Well, I am just thinking about the experience when, unfortunately, the decision of European Court of Human Rights on the claim of the Russian list of the group of Russian organization which was put into this list in Russia, who appealed to the European Court, and as if I'm not mistaken, July 14th last year, it was the decision of European Court which is let's say, extremely timely 9 years after the application. But I believe that would be the arguments and the legal analysis, not only Venice Commission about the Georgia, as far as I've seen already, it was done, but even the European Court of Human Rights already reviewed the practice and the law itself. And the European Court of Human Rights they stated that not only the practice of its implementation, but the law itself is cursed. Cannot be fitted to any possible democratic standards of the freedom of association. And I believe in the disputing at least in Georgian context, well, with Russia, we have no hope for now to discuss this decision, because the Russia just quit the Council of Europe and the European Court, respectively. But the Georgia may have this. I mean, Georgian democracy has this hope in the terms of the demonstrate and the distribute the decision, explaining this is the evaluation of Europe, and if the Georgia would like to be the part of this Europe, it is absolutely impossible to join this, practice which had been negatively already evaluated by European Court.
Georgian civil society is stronger than Azerbaijani civil society indeed, and I really believe and hope that with the support of general public, the civil society of Georgia will do its best not to let the governing party to pass this warring amendments to the law. But in the Azerbaijani case, we still going through the period that very restrictive laws are being adopted by the parliament. Unfortunately, the recent media law and the latest law on operation of political parties. But of course, for many countries in the region, Georgia used to be a heaven for political activists, lawyers, and for those who were looking for safe place, but definitely not for Azerbaijanis after Afgan Mukhtarlı's case. But again, I'm not capable enough, because I don't have this data, etc., to comment on those. But again, I strongly believe that our Georgian colleagues will do their best not to let those who want to destroy the current socio-political situation in Georgia.
Thank you all. There's some more questions coming in. So one to also Nijat and Dmitry, and perhaps about what the Georgian civil society organizations can learn, right? And yes, certainly Georgia has been more democratic compared to many of the neighbors for a long time. Having said that, the overall trend, including in Georgia and Ukraine and elsewhere, isn't necessarily towards more democratization. So I think increasingly those of us in Georgia, Ukraine, and other places need to start learning, unfortunately, from the experiences in Russia and Azerbaijan and other places that had to somehow civil society survive and adapt to much more restrictive environments. Yes, let's hope that Georgia continues on Europe's at least democratization path. But right, who knows? And this is not the trend right now. So any advice, any recommendations from, again, much more restrictive context, if possible?
Well, in the restrictive context, that is the story. Because I'm afraid exactly the Russian or Azerbaijani experience is not very much applicable. Because the problem is in the restrictive context, especially keeping in mind that either your donor is undesirable or you're foreign agent and you already have enough, that's different law in the terms of this law to report about the other, financial support from the undesirable or the other foreign agent law and so on and so forth. But in democratic context, I believe here is the option. The option is to demonstrate the more transparency, because for the NGO it's quite easy to publicize, and this is in democratic context, it's just quite easy to publicize, oh, this is the grant from this particular foundation, and this is the main goal, this is the outcome, and this is what we're supposed to do and what we did. So I believe that is absolutely not against the, not only against the law, but not against the normal practice of how the normal NGO is working. But in the restrictive context, there's absolutely different story, because we unfortunately should hide all the possible income, and that is more or less contributed to this conspirological narrative, and even support this idea. Oh, that is why we introduced this law, because these people had something in secret. Of course, we had something in secret. We cannot publicize it and we cannot make it open. So that's why I don't think that any practice from Russia, at least, could be useful for the democratic context.
I think there are these two ways of rephrasing this question. The one, let me start from the first one, as in how not to get there. Maybe could be at the same, because neither Russia nor Azerbaijan or everybody started in the 90s on the path to democratization. At some point, step by step, there was a U-turn made. It wasn't in one day. So maybe like there's a first rephrasing of the question, how to, not to get there, if there is anything to advise.
Yeah, but well, maybe back then, what the mistake had been made by Russian NGO, I believe, is the ignorance of the mass and regular and everyday information of the population. What is their function, regular activity, and support for the NGO? That's I believe we lost this opportunity and back then in 90s, and then the regime came for us. That was nobody to protest.
So let's maybe then, so let me then second part of the rephrasing I wanted to make to the question and turn to Nijat and then Saba, is exactly the information war, let's say, was lost by the civil society sector, right? So you were branded as foreign agents, as agents of foreign influence, as bringing something dangerous essentially to the Russian society and culture, right? So, and this is where I think earlier Saba mentioned that right now it was this attempt to pass the law was done in a very harsh way, without much thought. But if it is to be rephrased, if it is to be redirected, for example, to target initially LGBTQ community, which is potentially less popular, so there could be ways of approaching this step by step that can introduce restrictions, right, and essentially turn the civil society unpopular, which I'm assuming probably is not as popular anyways either. So yeah, from that perspective, perhaps Nijat and then Saba, any lessons learned about how to not to lose, let's say, the legitimacy contest here, because it's serious problem.
I will just shortly mention that apart from being transparent and also providing audience or the general public with correct and not biased information, we also need to, I guess, work closely with our supporters. I mean, with general public, especially with people from peripheries, to have discussions with them with the concrete topics. Why we need public organizations, non-governmental organizations in this country? What kind of role do these NGOs play in democratic development? What role does NGOs? No, not the NGOs. What is the foreign funding? What is the grant? Because ordinary people in our countries, via the TV manipulation, can easily accuse civil society actor NGOs of being a foreign agent, let's say, or something like that. So I guess in Georgian case, we saw that general public demonstrated its support towards the civil society. It's a great example, but I guess we need to more closely work with our people in order to build a mutual trust.
Thank you, Nijat. Saba?
I think. I think our fight in this manipulation and misinformation warfare should start with one simple realization, that we, the people, the lawyers or sociologists or social workers or whoever work in the NGOs have no idea how to fight this fight. We should ask the people who know how to communicate with the people. I mean, the communication specialists whose help we actually utilized in this campaign, because they know how to speak with the public. They know what, like, we have 50 million different truths why that bill was wrong and why we were right. But we have to select the ones that public sympathizes with the most. And we cannot just speak with the people with 50 different messages. We have to choose several ones, and we have to stick with the plan. So I think that's basically what we did. There are several traps that government actually laid for us during this process. They wanted us to defect from the main message. They wanted us to start talking with non-relevant stuff and so on. But we stayed on the message, and we used the knowledge of the people who have these relevant skills. So I think that's something that we as the civil society should do more in the future.
Thank you. So Paul?
Yeah, let me share my reflection too. I think that what happened last week and how it was interpreted, it was really seen that it's not about only NGOs, like on the center and NGOs and so on, because when this process started, and I think Georgian Dreams with the same to implement this law actually was really quick, we like very fast, repeatedly going from one hearing to another and so on. But people realize that it's part of this process because it's not that single only initiation of this law, but there are the cases of the limiting some like cultural institutions. So it was the part of this process of changing the course from the democracy somehow. So it was, and then rapidly like this law included, this initiated law including not only non-governmental organizations, but also media and also like printing and also so on. You realize that it's not about only NGOs, but it's about all the whole population is going to be affected by it. And also, I think was a very important role was played by young people who were really like students movement and so on, who were like just took over the protest, and also the like community organizations from the little villages or from the who are like cultural heritage, like some organizations or like people of special needs are like financed by some, I don't know, foreign grant or like maintaining of the cultural heritage, because in Georgia it's all over, like there are like different spheres where like this international funding is supporting. So I think this was the important project, that there were like videos or campaigns done in the small cities and villages too. People were like just putting lights and saying that this is like I am not an agent, so on. So I think that was very important because like only NGOs and how it's like, always the thing like it's also like Georgian conservative, Georgian like society also does not really like NGOs. There are people who are like, suspicious about it, but when they're understanding that it's changing the whole course of the country was like something which pushed people out, and a lot of people with the different beliefs, like really different beliefs, starting from the conservatives, because there was a statement made by the Tbilisi too, even, and some other sport clubs, and like some poets, like or writers and so on. So it was just like huge, very fast mobilization. And I think, sorry, I took too much.
Exactly. No, it's great.
Mm-hmm.
The fast mobilization is exactly to the part connected to the next question I have, which I got a few messages on the private chat, so the rest of the speakers cannot see. So let me voice one of them, and it's asking exactly about the kind of next steps and repercussions of this fast mobilization, because it actually doesn't look like it was a movement as such, right? So it's a kind of a somewhat spontaneous action. And people from very different ends of life came together, essentially, to some for one type of a cause, others for different. So any, do you see that this could lead to further consolidation or either civil society or maybe formation of a different style opposition from the one traditionally Georgia had. And the flip side of the question is what about the lessons learned by the government, right? So do you see also government essentially accepting and stepping back, or simply adopting and becoming more clever, let's say, in advancing authoritarian agenda? Saba?
I thought this question was for Sofia, but yeah, I think the government is certainly going to become more clever in future. This is why they're gonna select less blatant laws for the future, and they're probably going to think more regarding the naming and the framing of these bills. So it's gonna be harder for us to oppose them. However, what we're going to do is we don't want to lose the momentum that we have right now, and we're going to go out in the regions and speak directly with the people, as many people as possible, and just basically educate them regarding what Nijat said, that what we do, what the civil society is there for, and what are the values that we have, and what are the services that we provide, and so on. Why we are the existential part of a democracy of our nation. So we are also going to keep in touch with our international partners who have been very helpful, as they basically told the Georgian public what we wanted them to declare openly, that this bill was against the EU and ECA and the Council of Europe legislations, and they were opposed to it. So we want to become more resilient, and we'll see how it goes.
Saba, anything to add?
Yes, well, I wish I have seen some more political mobilization as a group, as something new coming, maybe it is, but I don't see it yet. But there is I think there are two important points. First about the political power, because the upcoming maybe Saba can either correct me, in 2024 we're gonna have a proportional elections, but we don't have still defines this barrier of which percentage, and if it will be without percentage, or if there can be more pluralist parliaments, in wishful thinking, but it can bring some real political voices in the parliament. So maybe if these people who are protesting and supporting the democracy can really support this process of asking and requesting from the government elections without a barrier, so that different voices will go in the parliament. This is again my wishful thinking, but that's what government learned. I think they just realized that they're bunch of these young people who are really independent and just going for it, and they just don't know their language of this new political activism, which is total different language. I also feel I don't know the language of this young generation who is really, we want this and we will fight for it. And it was really impressive, and I think without them nothing would change or happen in the previous week too. So I do. Before I was very dramatic. I see now, I have the hope that there are these people coming who have their political stand, they have their power, but I don't see and always this we have this duality, this always blame each other. There is this, we have this national party, previous opposition, the opposition party, national movement and this, and they always do play and do this how it's called, but we do need and there is a space or vacuum in between, so there can be more political voices. Sorry if I talk too mess a bit.
Thank you, Saba. And turning back to the regional context, from the Georgian land, yes, it's a fight for keeping democracy or democratization processes alive and well. But then we can see overall the trend in the region isn't in direction of democratization. And there was another question about lessons and what. Well, so far we're asking what we can learn from Russia and Azerbaijan for Georgia, but maybe the reverse, what can be done in a more restrictive context. And overall, I think that's an important part of a conversation that we are not frankly having in a civil society, because we're clearly differentiating, we are very much connecting, say, peace building or other processes, or other change coming from the society to democratization. And by all means, that should continue. But de facto, we need to also acknowledge that majority of the world, including majority of our region, does not live anymore in a democracy, and probably we don't even have a prospect of democracy coming back anytime soon, perhaps not in our lifetimes anymore. And this should still continue, mobilizing and working for change. On the peace building end, that started as a conversation, as in what's a non-democratic, how to decouple peace building from democratization. As in, not that we don't want democratization, but while it doesn't come, we should continue somehow living together, right? Similar conversation I'm starting to see on a much more advanced, actually, on the environmentalist end, right? So yes, we know how to work in a democracy for environmental causes, but most of the world is not democratic, and right, we cannot only limit the work for environmental protection and rights and essentially future of the planet only to democratic states. We need to work also in China, Russia, Turkey, and other places. So perhaps from this perspective, right, any thoughts, any lessons as in how to work in a non-democratic context? Like, again, as in, we cannot necessarily leave it to the governments only because it's a non-democracy, since they didn't prove so far to be interested much in our futures. Any thoughts on that? Or any advice for civil societies in more restrictive spaces from anyone of the speakers? All right, I'll call you, Dmitry. How do you continue to work, and any advice do you have for the rest of us?
Well, here is the interesting struggle always been, and this is dilemma. This dilemma started already in 2015 when the law was adopted. Some people believe that is absolutely unfair. This is unjust law, and we shouldn't follow it. And that is one of the substantial amount of organization just they closed, and they decided not to be a foreign agent. The second part of the story and the other strategy was taken by the other organization to report, to continue work as long as it possible in this unfriendly context. And I believe this is the important discussion. And what kind of the possible solution in the given context? Because for some organizations, maybe that was just a still option to work. For some organization, it's just to work means just rather to totally crash the rest of the reputation of the human rights world, being stigmatized as a foreign agent. But my answer is to be honest, Russia is not a good example to follow because we don't have the kind of visible success in any possible direction. But I believe this is the discussion between the two different options: either to follow this unjust law and in the given context to survive, and trying to more and less accept this frame and to continue to work, or just to make a demonstration, just to close all the possible activity, or just in a closed organization and stop to be public. And it is very hard to say what decision is better in this context.
Yeah, thank you. I can see the dilemma, of course, but again, having just recently been reading a little bit on China and the specifically environmental organizations, essentially, I think it's more than at some point. Why China, I think, is important because unlike Russia, for example, or the rest of post-Soviet space, it never was democratizing, so they never had that option for themselves, right? The civil society in there, so they didn't see this as dichotomy. Essentially, they adapted to the existing conditions, and there seem to be some paths, third paths, fourth paths, essentially, of how to function still. Not only letting government to dictate, but trying to influence the policies, which again, require much more ingenuity, I guess, than we are used to. We are used to protesting and standing up for human rights, right, or democracy, or essentially retreating. I myself left my country at some point of my life. So essentially we seem to have this very black and white view on this. And unfortunately, I think we might need to start adapting to accepting that we have to deal with autocracy for long haul and somehow function, unfortunately, but in that space. That's, I think, the question I'm trying to ask. So Nijat, anything, any advice from you, again, working in a less democratic context?
Currently based outside of Azerbaijan, therefore I'm not in the better position to comment about that. But some colleagues of mine, I mean, it depends. It depends on the field of the operation, direction of the operation of the NGO. I mean, just supporting each other and saving the resources that left and directing it to the progress of society. That's what I can say briefly, because in a restrictive environment, it is quite difficult to maintain operation because it has several safety risks, financial risks, etc. But again, it depends.
Thank you. So I think the big theme then emerges, as I heard throughout the whole webinar, is the legitimacy of the civil society. I think one of the reasons where we saw in Russia, the civil society lost, let's say, the cause, seemed to be losing the legitimacy in the eyes of the larger public, and whether it's through mutual support or better messaging, the way Saba was discussing, yes, should be the keeping the legitimacy in front of the public seems to be very important direction, cross-cutting theme. Any final thoughts, before we conclude?
I still, now thinking about your question, I still believe somehow that practicing democracy is beyond the institutions and NGOs, should be beyond, and we have seen several examples, I think in the region too. There are some mobilization of people and fighting for their rights, changing something. So yeah, and we see it in the regions or villages in Georgia too. And there is a specific, there is a hydropower plant. There is something like environment farming, and people are mobilizing. So it's a practice. So I really hope that it won't shrink the space so much. This situation that there won't be this practicing democracy. Course, maintaining these institutions and NGOs too, and advocacy and institutional work and how to say it? This is important, but there are people who are who you should speak up the voices and mobilize and change something. So I still believe in that dream.
Thank you. Yeah, let's keep believing in a dream, and not just believing, but hopefully also working for it. As I think it cannot happen on its own. It's a long road towards that. So thank you all very much. Not a pleasant topic, although with a silver lining of the protests, I think were very inspiring, and how quickly the mobilization happened, and the results have showed that there is a lot of resiliency in the Georgian civil society and society in general towards an attempt to make a U-turn towards autocracy. So good luck to the Georgian society, good luck to the rest of us, and thank you very much one more time.